coming out. I know there's a lot of different events going on in SF Blockchain Week, and yeah, really excited to share all the work that we've been focusing on over the last year and a half, last year. And I think we have some exciting features in store for you. And yeah, so before we dive into the content, we're going to be spending most of the time tonight talking about 0xv3. It's our third version of the protocol, and this month actually will be the 3-year anniversary for our team starting to work on 0x. So we've been focusing on this for a while. We've been working hard on it, and I have to say that with 0x version 3, I really do feel like I'm as excited as I've ever been. I think it's like the best realization of the protocol, and yeah, I'm really excited for everyone to get to learn more about it tonight. So yeah, if you're not already a part of our community, we welcome you, and yeah, thank you for coming. Please feel free to check out our social media channels, follow us on Twitter, on our Discord, join our Reddit, etc. We actually have some really cool videos on YouTube if you want to learn a little bit more about the technical details of how the protocol is put together. So I would highly recommend checking that out. And we're also hiring. So there's a couple roles that we're looking to fill. We're looking for an engineering manager, and we're also looking for a finance lead, financial analyst. So if anyone here feels like it's a good fit, or if you know someone who might be a good fit, we would love an introduction. And yeah, you can feel free to reach out to any of us here later tonight. All right, so our mission is to create a tokenized world where all value can flow freely. We want 0x protocol to empower anyone in the world to open up a market and trade with anyone else that has an internet connection. We want all forms of value to be tokenized, and we want all of these markets to exist and be openly accessible. So with V3, I think we took a really big step towards this goal and our vision. And tonight you're going to be learning about a few of the kind of specific features that are baked into 0x protocol version 3, as well as the progress we've been making on 0x mesh. So we're going to start off with the thing that I think most people are really, really excited to learn more about and probably only kind of understand, which are the ZRX tokenomics and staking. And so Peter, who is our research fellow at 0x and who led the research effort behind the new token economics, is going to be giving that presentation after me. Then Amir is going to talk a little bit about kind of V3 at a high level. What are some of the other features going into it? Blake is going to talk a little bit about market making on 0x and the opportunity there. Then we have Michael Feng from Hummingbot, who's going to talk about their product, which makes it really, really easy for anyone to start market making without having to build everything from scratch. So you can deposit some crypto, and you can kind of tweak your strategy, and you can get going very quickly. And then Browne is going to give the final presentation on 0x Mesh, which is a peer-to-peer network for propagating 0x orders, and is becoming an increasingly important part of our technology stack. And then after that, we'll have a Q&A. So without any further ado, I would like to introduce Peter up to talk about the new token economics.
All right, welcome everybody. And I'm going to tell you today about sort of a high-level overview focusing on why did we do this? What was going on? What was the situation we encountered that led us to introduce this new token economics in V3? What are we really trying to achieve by doing this? And it's really, for me, mostly about making sure that this utility token is actually in the hands of people who are going to use the protocol and people who will have an interest in ensuring that the protocol's long-run success. So we want to figure out a way of making this token useful for users and getting them engaged in voting and governance so as to help make decisions that improve our long-run prospects. Okay, so as a starting point for this problem, in the status quo situation, we have these users of the 0x protocol, who are in this Venn diagram, traders, these are people who are making trades using the 0x smart contract suite. We also have the 0x token holders, and these two groups, barely overlap, so that we have most people, 23,000 people who have traded, 23,000 unique addresses, and only 2,800 who have both traded and also hold some 0x tokens in their wallet. And then we have far more addresses, 77,000, who hold some 0x tokens, but there's no evidence they've traded. So what we see from this is there's a lack of overlap between ownership of the 0x token, right? So that the token holders who sort of backed creation of the protocol, for the most part, aren't also users of the protocol. Conversely, those who use the protocol are rarely token holders, and this is what we would like to change, right? And why is it so important to change this? Well, from our perspective, we've introduced token voting. We've introduced governance through the 0x token, which allows 0x token holders to decide upon the protocol's long-term direction, right? They can approve things like the new tokenomics, like V3 upgrades. And the idea behind this is that the users of the protocol, if they hold the token, they're going to vote for the changes that make the protocol better. Whereas we might worry that if we have a non-user, they're not so much interested perhaps in trading or in making the 0x protocol better. They might be interested in other things, like, for example, how can I earn some money in a way that doesn't necessarily coincide with the interests of traders. So we would like to ensure that this voting process works as intended, so that the users are actually the people who are voting and deciding upon protocol changes. In order to achieve that, we needed to get these 0x tokens that are currently held by third parties who don't trade into the hands of more traders. So we need to sort of change this Venn diagram so these two groups overlap more closely. And this token economics program is kind of our plan to make that happen. Okay, so we see here another Venn diagram. And this is meant to conjure up this idea of governance and incentives working together, right? So with our new token economics, we're going to have incentives that reward people for holding and staking the 0x token. And the goal, the reasoning behind that is that we want to ensure that people who are holding the token are also users. We want to create incentives for our users to hold the token so that these users will be the people who are voting in governance decisions. Okay, so this governance here is allowing the token to function as a mechanism to vote on smart contract upgrades, and the incentives are encouraging users to hold the token. So these two things are working together in order to ensure that their protocol is going to be owned and governed by its users rather than by a third party who might not have the best interests of traders at heart. Okay. So this gets back to our mission, right? So we have the mission or purpose of 0x governance is to sort of ensure that the organization in the long term sort of works on behalf of users to make the trading experience better, to make a platform that's open and accessible to everyone, that anyone can trade on, that has liquidity, that has low fees, low frictions, a lack of permissions that prevent people from using it. We want to make sure that 0x remains true to this vision of creating a tokenized world where all value can flow freely. And we can kind of unpack that into three components. One is openness. We want to eliminate barriers to online exchange of financial or non-financial tokenized assets. Okay, so we just want to make it so that anyone can just turn on their computer and start trading with a counterparty anywhere else in the world without any kind of obstacles or permission process stopping them. And then this trading process, having it be open alone is not good enough. It also must be efficient. We must have users benefiting from utilizing our protocol to trade as opposed to an alternative, like say a centralized exchange, another decentralized exchange protocol. We want to make sure that we can provide liquidity on favorable terms for our users so that users are realizing an economic benefit by choosing us as opposed to another service provider that might meet their needs. Okay, and then finally, the last component of this is governance. Like this is what we've set out. These are our ideals. And we want to create a system of voting which ensures that the protocol is accountable to users for fulfilling this mission. So that users who care about their own benefit, who care about openness, hold our token and will vote for changes that help to advance this mission. Okay, so really then the job is to sort of get the 0x token into hands of people who believe in these goals just as much as we do. Okay, so how do we do that? How do we persuade these people who want a free and open, permissionless, decentralized exchange protocol? How do we persuade this group of 0x users to also become 0x owners? Well, simple exhortation won't work, right? The structure of 0x ownership, where we see that most people who trade don't own 0x tokens, most 0x token holders don't trade, this reflects the fundamental economics of the system. It's not something that, a marketing miscommunication. It's that there's an incentive structure which determines, whether people are willing to hold 0x tokens or not. And as long as the incentive structure is in place, if we ask someone, please, buy some 0x tokens, use them to vote, they're going to say, well, Fred over here, Fred votes for the same things I want. He holds 0x tokens. He can vote for me. Why should I bother? Right? And then Fred will say the same thing about Paul and Jacob and Alice, et cetera, so that no one is actually taking this responsibility on their shoulders of participating in governance, because it's not in their economic interest to do so. These voting rights alone, as we can see from our experience from this data, they're not sufficient to motivate people to become 0x owners just because they happen to utilize the 0x protocol. So we need to change this. We need to sweeten the deal such that 0x users realize a material benefit from 0x ownership that is unavailable to other groups, right? So that for someone who's using 0x, for that person subjectively, 0x is more valuable, more useful to him or her than it would be to another person who never trades at all. Okay, and so this idea gets into this ownership feedback loop. And this is kind of like a big idea. This is an exciting thing. It's an idea that who owns something? If you create like an organization, who owns it is going to determine the organization's long-run trajectory. It's not just, it could change what one organization does to make it quite different from an organization that's owned by another group. Right? So we can start with our token incentives playing this kind of formative role in determining ownership. If we introduce some token incentives that result in 0x ownership providing specific benefits for traders on the protocol and not for anyone else who doesn't trade, right, that will encourage traders to own 0x tokens as opposed to other groups. Right? Now that we've done that, we now have increased 0x ownership among 0x users, among these traders, and then we have this voting system that determines the set of policies and changes that are introduced into the protocol over a long period of time. Right? And these voters who hold 0x, if they're also 0x users, they're going to vote for policies that benefit them. Right? The 0x holders, they're going to prefer to vote for smart contract changes that make the trading experience better, and not necessarily those that are highly profitable. Not necessarily like, oh, how can we extract as much money as possible from usage? How do we monetize this most efficiently? Right? If we have users voting, they will consider more strongly, how do we make the user experience, how do we make user benefits improve, rather than how do we maximize monetization. So they will then, again, introduce specific benefits into the protocol for 0x users as opposed to other groups. And then we have this feedback loop where the protocol remains committed in the long term to maximizing user benefit. Okay, so then what does a user mean? Right, so we said that 0x users should hold the 0x token. They should use those tokens they hold to vote on behalf of the user interest. But the word user is kind of poorly defined because most of these, the 0x is one example, but most blockchain platforms, applications, have multiple classes of users. And we could imagine, user ownership to thus being different things depending on what type of user we're talking about. The 0x protocol in particular has three main classes of users. The first are relayers. So relayers host these marketplaces that provide data about assets that are available for sale. Right? So the relayers are providing this kind of online bulletin board that allows you to access organized information about what you can buy and sell. Then we have market makers. So market makers are running businesses where they own an inventory of assets of different types of tokens, and then they go to the relayer and they post information about the inventory. They post offers to buy and sell the items in their inventory, and they charge a small markup, right? They add, when they're selling, they add a little bit to the price. When they're buying, they buy at a little bit of a discount, so that every time the inventory turns over, they earn money, and that's kind of their business model. And then finally, at the bottom, we have retail traders. We have sort of these end users that are not really running or involved in the protocol as a business, but maybe they want to utilize an application, or maybe they're making like a they're wanting to change their portfolio, add or remove some token, liquidate something they own. Right? We have people who are using the protocol for more instrumental reasons, just to meet some sort of transient objective they have. Okay, so we would like to encourage, among these three groups, we could pick any of the three, right? We could imagine owners being any of these three groups, but we'd like to choose a group specifically whose interests most closely align with our mission, right? Which was to make sure this protocol is run in the interest of users, to make sure that it was committed to maximizing user benefit and improving the experience for traders. Okay, and in these three classes, we've identified market makers as the most logical group to target in the long term, for increased 0x ownership. And so what are the reasons for this? Well, the most important thing is we believe that market makers have sort of intrinsic interest in pursuing our mission of growing the ecosystem, of making access to this tokenized exchange functionality universally accessible and accessible without barriers and at low cost. Right? So they benefit in particular from making it free or very cheap to utilize something like the 0x protocol as opposed to quite expensive. So this is part of it, is that, and we'll get to that, back to that in a second. And the next part is that market-making firms are different from, say, the average user. Like if you just go onto the protocol and you want to buy, some MKR token and you only use it one time, like you have some level of engagement. You're benefiting from the protocol, but you don't have like a long-term stake, or your interests aren't sort of persistently connected to the protocol's growth, right? Because you can sort of switch relatively easily to some other provider to perform the same function. You didn't really make an investment. If the protocol ceases to work, you don't stand to lose very much. You could probably go somewhere else and use that service. Market makers, on the other hand, they're building a business on the protocol, which requires them to make an upfront investment. They have to learn how decentralized exchanges work. They have to learn how to manage real-time data, sort of pseudo real-time data on the blockchain. Deal with gas auctions. There's this huge amount of stuff that market-making firms have to deal with in order to get set up and trading on decentralized exchanges, and on 0x in particular, right? So when market-making firms do this, when they pay employees to learn all these things, they're making an investment that only pays off if this DeFi ecosystem, if the 0x ecosystem in particular, blossoms and flourishes and becomes larger in scope in the future, at which time they'll be positioned to sort of understand how it works best and how to be doing a large, profitable volume of business using this knowledge. Right? So the market-making firms then have kind of an intrinsic interest that's tied up with the protocol's long-run growth. The last issue is that the market maker owners address a potential problem of monopoly or oligopoly in the exchange market. So exchange markets have this feature that the larger, the volume that is traded upon a limit order book exchange, the lower prices that can be offered. So that when initially a market makers will go to one venue, and that venue has the most rapid rate of turnover of assets. So if you list an order on that venue, it's likely to be filled more quickly than if you post it somewhere else. And that ability to quickly turn over an inventory, quickly turn a profit on inventory, allows the market maker to charge a lower price. And this lower price, a user comes along and they see, well, this place has the lowest prices, that place has high prices, and they then decide, I'm going to take my business to the venue with the lowest price, and that venue with the lowest price then has even more turnover, and the market maker can charge even less on that venue. And that will continue until we have this tendency to have very large, centralized exchange platforms form, and the owners of those exchange platforms, can offer lower prices than their competitors who are smaller, and that means they can take advantage of that by adding a fee to every single trade. They can charge, say, 0.1%, 0.2%, 0.5% on every single exchange that moves through their large centralized platform, extracting a large benefit at the user's expense. So market makers as owners are quite different from this because they are earning money from turnover, right? If the fees are low, the market maker can sell a larger volume of assets and earn greater income for his business. And so he sort of bears the cost. When fees get hiked up and the retail traders are harmed, the market maker is harmed too. So the market maker as an owner has an interest in maintaining low fees so they can do high volumes and earn lots of profit from turning their inventories over. And this is something that's reflected in the structure of equity exchanges. Until recently, like the last couple decades, most exchanges for the past 150 years have been owned by market makers. They've been sort of under a nonprofit structure where large market-making firms own portions of the equity exchange, and they hold sort of voting rights over what fees and policies are utilized. Right, so we're trying to kind of revive this idea because we think it's quite appropriate to our mission and goals for the protocol's long-run future. Okay, so how does this actually get operationalized? How do we create these incentives that reward users for holding 0x? And particularly, how do we reward market makers for holding 0x? Well, we need a revenue source somewhere, and so this revenue is going to come from fees charged by a taker. So a market maker will post an order to a relayer, right? So he lists this offer to buy and sell, and then a taker, when he fills this order, is going to need to attach a fee in Ethereum. So this is like Ethereum token, right? So the fee is going to be paid in Ethereum, and it will be proportional to the gas fee. So approximately speaking, if you're paying 10 cents a transaction, Ethereum transaction, you would be now paying, as a taker, 10 cents on top of this as a 0x protocol fee when you execute a trade. And these fees, these Ethereum fees, are collected and put into a pot, which is then going to be paid out back to the maker through a process we'll look at in one moment. Okay, and this process involves 0x staking, so that this market maker is not, in order to earn these fees that reward him for providing liquidity, he's not just going to need to perform trades, he will also have to have a quantity of 0x stake associated with him. And this works such that the more trades the market maker performs, the more rewards he gets. And likewise, the more 0x stake is associated with this market maker, the more rewards he gets. So these market makers have this incentive, they have this reward for getting stake to back them. And they can do this in two ways. One is to buy 0x and use their own 0x holdings to stake themselves. The other way is to reach out to the large community of 0x holders, which I hope some of you are members of, and offer them profit-sharing agreements where the market maker says, hey, I need 0x, I don't have it, you have 0x, you're maybe not doing anything with it. If you delegate your 0x to me, I'll give you a fixed percentage of all the fees I earn. And so the market maker can say, hey, I'm going to give you 30% of the fees I earn if you delegate me this 0x, and then I can earn more. And so the maker creates this agreement, and the delegator can sign it and delegate his 0x to this maker, who's then going to be able to earn rewards from trading using their protocol. And these rewards get larger, the more 0x the maker receives. Okay? The next step of this is that this maker has this 0x that's allocated to him. He also performs a number of trades. And based upon the maker's number of trades and his amount of 0x, he's going to get a share of the total amount of protocol fees collected by all traders, and from all traders on the protocol in one 10-day long period. Okay, so this is the total amount of rewards collected from everyone. These are the Ethereum tokens, the whole pie. A part of that pie goes to a market maker's staking pool, and then the market maker is going to pass a share of rewards for his staking pool back to his delegators according to that agreement they both signed. And that will mean that the delegators get rewarded for holding 0x. They get this payment in Ethereum. And in addition to this, not covered here, there are some small modifications such that a market maker, if he stakes on his own behalf, like if he rather than renting or sort of getting stake delegated to him, if he stakes on his own behalf, he gets a slight bonus. So that there is this incentive because of this slight bonus the market maker gets for using his own 0x rather than borrowing it. This then encourages him in the long run to begin to own 0x on his own himself, rather than constantly be receiving it from delegators. And we hope that will then lead to this long-run transition where over the course of a long period of time, market makers come to be the majority owners of the 0x token. I'm going to pass you to our CTO, Amir, to tell us about V3.
Thanks, Peter. So Peter did a really great job explaining some of the new token economics and our rationale for introducing this. I'm going to dig into the mechanics just a little bit more, as well as some of the other features in V3 that I think are super valuable. So first, some learnings from 0x 2.0. 2.0 has been live on mainnet for just over a year now. It introduced a brand new architecture that allowed the protocol to quickly add support for brand new asset types, as well as certain custom settlement mechanisms. And that's been working really well. We've been able to quickly iterate and add support for new things, and there's a pattern that we'd like to continue taking advantage of in the future. It also allowed us to experiment with new extension contracts in a very low-risk way, such as the coordinator contract. So without going into it too deeply, the coordinator is a new relayer model currently being used by Bamboo Relay that has some nice benefits for liquidity providers. The point is, these new extension contracts were also super valuable for running experiments. But one of the things we realized was that these things actually changed the user experience of interacting with the protocol, and I think for that reason did not get super wide adoption. We have also found that mandatory fees denominated in the ZRX token added unnecessary friction to the protocol. In practice, no relayers are really charging fees right now, and I think part of it is because of this additional friction. It's complicated for users to understand, and it's actually also pretty complex for developers to work with this. And finally, liquidity has been steadily improving over the protocol in the past year. It's actually night and day today versus a year ago. But for a while, it was a pretty serious issue, and we got the feedback that liquidity was not good enough to really build a business on top of 0x, and it became sort of our main focus at that time, and that's why we really seriously started thinking about adding this new liquidity incentivization layer to the protocol around the beginning of this year. So it's been in the works for quite a while now. So we'll start with the easy one. This addresses the issue of charging fees denominated in the ZRX token. In version 3.0, a community member proposed a change that would allow relayers to charge fees in any arbitrary asset that can be supported by the protocol. So this could be, DAI, it could be Ether, it could be CryptoKitties, could be some combination of CryptoKitties and DAI. It doesn't matter. Any asset that's supported by the protocol. But most importantly, it also allows fees to very easily be charged as a percentage of the trade value, which actually makes things much more efficient. Comes with some pretty drastic user experience and developer experience improvements. Next, I'm going to dive a little bit into the mechanics of the staking mechanism and certain design decisions that we made. So Peter already covered some of this a little bit, but I'll recap. So every time a taker fills an order over the protocol, they will have to pay a mandatory protocol fee denominated in Ether. This fee scales with the gas price of the transaction, and I'll get into why we chose to do that in a second. And at the end of every epoch in the system, which is 10 days long, staked market makers can claim rewards that are proportional to the amount of rebates that were attributed to them, as well as the amount of ZRX that is staked with them. And finally, holders can delegate to market makers who are willing to share rewards with them. And also importantly, these delegators give 50% of their voting power to the market makers. So now I'll dig into why we decided to have the fee scale with the gas price of the transaction. I think this is a pretty important point. So this is a known issue with most of the liquidity models we see in decentralized exchanges today. You can create orders for free by just creating this signed message, but in order to cancel the order, that actually requires an on-chain transaction. So that costs gas fees, but more importantly, it is slow. You can't be constantly updating your prices in the same way you might on a centralized exchange. On a centralized exchange, you could potentially update your price 1,000 times a second if you wanted to. But you can't do that in a decentralized exchange, and this creates some issues. So this is a pretty extreme example of the problem, Let's say I have a buy order out to buy 1 Ether at $200 on a decentralized exchange. And very suddenly, the price on the centralized exchanges just gaps down to $150, and I can't cancel my order quickly enough. So here come the arbitrage bots. Arbitrage bots make up, I think, something like 25% of the volume on decentralized exchanges today. They're very sophisticated and are really good at taking advantage of these opportunities. So they want to sell Ether to me at $200 and buy it for $150 on the centralized exchange. So one arbot comes in and submits a transaction. Another arbot says, hey, that's actually a really good deal. I also want to do the same thing. So they submit the same transaction, except they pay a slightly higher gas price. And this goes on and on and on until someone finally wins this auction for this super juicy transaction. And we end up with the market maker of the order losing $50. Maybe the arbot comes out slightly ahead, net of gas fees. Maybe they made like $10 in this scenario. And the miner makes the most money because they get the gas fees from all of these arbitrage bots. So wouldn't it be great if we could redirect some of the profits from the arbots and the miners back to the market makers? You already saw this image from Peter, but that's essentially what we are doing here. By tying the protocol fee to the gas price of a transaction, which is eventually rebated back to the market makers, you're kind of reducing their risk of them getting arbed by these stale orders. You also end up kind of redistributing fees from price-insensitive traders back to the market makers who are staked as well. In theory, market makers should be able to actually provide tighter spreads net of protocol fees because they have this protection from arbitrage bots. Some other rationale for the protocol fees. I like to think of the gas price of a transaction as something that's correlated to the value of the liquidity that is provided. Block space is a scarce resource, and people are constantly competing for it by paying higher and higher gas prices. In that sense, I think market makers end up getting higher rebates for providing higher value liquidity. As Peter mentioned, this also incentivizes market makers to actually be users and owners of the protocol. It aligns them in the governance process, and all of these parameters in the protocol are also upgradable as well. There are a lot of kind of knobs they could spin to optimize the efficiency of these rewards. And finally, I think this will just create much more sustainable liquidity. It creates lock-in for the market makers. It creates a steady stream of rewards for them. And I think there will be much less incentive to fork off to other protocols. This is another really big feature that I think not a lot of people are aware of. ZIP 47 introduced what is called the ERC20 bridge proxy. And without getting too technical, this provides two main pieces of functionality. So the first one is covered on this slide. It allows liquidity to be sourced from any other on-chain decentralized exchange and represented as a 0x order. So this just creates a nice single integration point for anyone who wants to interact with all of the decentralized exchanges at once. They could just use 0x, and that will kind of encompass all of the decentralized exchanges. One of the other nice things is it allows for really seamless market fills across decentralized exchanges. DEX aggregators today are getting better, but initially the way they worked was, they would look at the price on every single decentralized exchange, and whatever had the best price, you would just fill all of your volume on that single decentralized exchange. This makes it really easy to kind of split your fill across the decentralized exchanges and really get the best price, similar to what OTC desks do. Initially, this will come with support for Uniswap, Kyber, and Oasis. But one of the nice things is these are completely permissionless to build and deploy and plug into the protocol. Anyone can do it. You can iterate super quickly. And most importantly, this does not actually change the user experience of interacting with the protocol. There's another really interesting use case that this proxy enables. So this is a chart from just a few days ago showing the total value locked in DeFi. And looking at this, it's really amazing to see how much traction DeFi has been getting. But when I see this chart, I think, wow, that is actually a lot of capital that's not really being efficiently utilized. This capital is typically locked in one smart contract for one purpose, but there is no reason that this capital can't be used for multiple things at once. It's really just a limitation of the smart contracts built in DeFi today. A lot of them just don't enable a lot of flexibility around this. So this is what the bridge contracts do. They allow 0x to tap into all of this locked liquidity. So the way it works is this proxy just requires that a transfer for a single ERC20 token comes from somewhere to the end user account. And that could be via a trade from another decentralized exchange. It could be just withdrawing your asset from somewhere. It could be borrowing an asset from somewhere. It's very flexible. And what this ends up looking like is you can now provide liquidity while simultaneously having your assets in, let's say, a lending protocol. And now you're earning interest while you are trading, which is really nice because today, market makers have to actually make the choice. Like, do I want to provide liquidity on 0x, or do I want to earn 10% interest on compound? Now you can do both at the same time. It also allows market makers to scale up their liquidity by margin trading. So you could conceivably have $10,000 of capital and provide, let's say, up to $50,000 worth of liquidity by using some of these margin lending protocols. It also means that you no longer need to actually hold inventory of these volatile assets that you are market making, as long as you are able to borrow them from somewhere. So I can just post an order to, let's say, sell my, sell my Ether, and I'm only holding DAI. And as soon as someone fills that order, it will atomically borrow that Ether and sell it. And you can also provide liquidity on multiple different decentralized exchange protocols at the same time if you want. You could do like Kyber and 0x. Anything that requires a deposit contract, you can use in combination with this. So I think it's really nice because there's a lot of capital locked up in DeFi. These are all users who are super familiar with DeFi. They understand smart contracts. They understand MetaMask. They already got past that user experience. These are the users that we want in our ecosystem, and now they can use their capital for providing liquidity as well as interacting with the rest of DeFi. And I think that'll be really impactful. And with that, I will pass off to Blake.
All right, I'm Blake. I lead ecosystem programs at 0x, and I'm up here for just a short talk about 0x market making. All right, so I was going to start with some market making basics, but I think Amir and Peter have covered a little bit about what is a market maker, but why are market makers so important? It's because they act as the counterparty for a lot of the trades that are happening on 0x. So 0x allows the trading of lots of different tokenized assets. And not all of those assets need a market maker, but a lot of the volume today is going through ERC20 tokens like DAI and Ethereum, where it actually is very helpful to have a market maker on the other side of those trades to provide really good pricing and just an experience where there's always a counterparty. So they're very important to 0x, and we kind of need them to be there all the time to provide liquidity and offer the low prices that people rely on. So what's new and interesting about market making on 0x right now? In addition to the market making staking incentives that are going live with V3, we've actually been seeing a growing amount of volume on the protocol. So the 0x market making opportunity has been growing. This graph is showing volume over time, and it's a little hard to see, but it's about $30 million a month for the past few months, which represents a large opportunity. But I wanted to clarify that the traditional market making calculation is sort of a volume times spread equals total opportunity. And the volume on 0x being 30 million might not sound like a lot when you compare it to a centralized exchange. But when you look at centralized exchanges, that total opportunity really isn't available to market makers. There are fees, and you actually have to hold quite a bit of inventory in order to take advantage of that particular opportunity. And the biggest thing is that the competition is pretty rough. So if you're trading on a centralized exchange as a market maker, you're going up against the best of the best, which means that you need to invest pretty heavily in your infrastructure in order to compete and actually get access to the opportunity that's there. But the good news about market making on top of 0x is that there aren't a ton of people doing it today, in that there's a lot of opportunity for you to start and actually capitalize on the opportunity that's available. And that's pretty easy to do today. The 0x market making opportunity, kind of in summary, is there's $30 million traded last month. There are 0 market maker fees to get started. There are new staking incentives for market makers coming online with V3, so it's actually a really good time to start. And there's way less competition than centralized exchange, especially in some of the niche pairs where you can actually optimize your strategies today. So if you're interested in starting, a really easy way is actually to start running Hummingbot software. So Michael Feng is going to come up and talk a little bit more about Hummingbot software. You can also set up your own custom software. We help market makers get onboarded to 0x. I would be excited to talk to you more about that. It's really easy to provide liquidity on Radar Relay and Bamboo Relay on V2 right now, and when V3 goes live in a month, through 0x Mesh. And we send out kind of updates to market makers on a continuous basis as well. So with that, I wanted to introduce Michael Feng to talk a little bit more about Hummingbot and like a really easy way to start market making on 0x today.
Thanks a lot, Blake. Hi, I'm Mike, the CEO of Hummingbot. Maybe before I get started, can you raise your hands if you know what we do? Okay, great. So about half the room. So let me just take maybe 1 minute to summarize what Hummingbot is. Hummingbot is an open source market making client. And what I mean by clients, I mean, it's sort of like, just like when we have Ethereum, you have like Geth and Parity, which are blockchain clients. Hummingbot also is a client. So it's a local piece of software that you run either on your desktop, in the cloud, or any other device that you want to run bots. And the reason it's a client is because it holds your private key, and it uses your private key in order to sign messages that it basically does automatically. Because when you're market making, you can't. It's really hard to do that manually. You really want some type of bot that can automatically adjust your orders as the market moves. And so that's why we designed it as a software client. It's open source. It supports a number of different 0x relayers as well as centralized exchanges. And the strategies we offer include arbitrage, market making, when you're kind of just basically making a market and adjusting the spreads, and also something we call cross-exchange market making, which is allows you to make a market on one exchange while hedging your risk on another. So in particular, this is really great for DEXs because you can basically source liquidity from Binance or some centralized exchange, and then basically make money by porting that liquidity over to Radar Relay or DEX. So it's like Robinhood, basically, stealing from the rich, giving to the ones who most need it. So some updates on Hummingbot. Recently, we've seen a surge of activity, especially because now it's easier to use. We have much better documentation than before, especially around how to build custom strategies or to add your own connectors. So right now we're seeing about 1,000 installs per month, and about a really vibrant and active community on Discord. We support 9 different exchanges. So and on the 0x Relay side includes both Bamboo Relay and 0x. Bamboo actually wrote the first community-contributed Hummingbot connector. And that one's unique because it uses a new coordinator spec. So which means that for market makers, you can basically do soft cancels. You can basically adjust your orders in real time without having to pay gas. For Radar, you can still market make, and our preferred approach is to use order expiration. So to let the orders expire and then replace them instead of paying gas to cancel. Finally, we're seeing that one of the reasons why we open source Hummingbot is because having run a quant fund in the past, no one should be building and maintaining exchange connectors. It's a lot of low-level work, especially given the fact that a lot of exchanges in crypto, there's a lack of standardization in the APIs. So it really should be something that should be done once and everyone can use. And so for now, we're starting to really experiment with Gitcoin bounties, then incentivize external developers to build Hummingbot connectors. And so right now we have a couple, so if you're interested, please check it out. Coming soon, we're really excited. Tomorrow, there'll be a download button on our homepage where you can basically, if you're Windows or Mac, hit download, it'll install an application, and you can just run that. Currently, you have to mess around with Docker or install from source and all that kind of stuff. And but our goal is to really allow market making and frankly algo trading in general to be available to anyone. And so we're starting with gradual programs that hopefully in a couple of years will be like a nice mobile app that you can just run from your phone. We are going to support 0x v3 and mesh. Working closely with the team. We're speccing it out right now. We probably won't support it immediately after launch, but I expect that within about a month after both v3 and mesh goes live, we'll have rolled out support. But finally, the reason I wanted to talk today is because I think the natural question we get as an open source project is, how do you guys make money? How can I trust that you guys are going to be around in a year before I spend time contributing to your project? And so, we've really thought about how we should make money. And so finally, really pleased today to unveil our business model. And it's something that we're calling liquidity mining. So as you can see from the shirt I'm wearing today. And the genesis of this idea is that market making is something that a lot of folks in crypto are paying a lot of money for. The reason is because when you have the fragmentation of markets tend to compete on the basis of liquidity. And therefore, the smaller markets who need liquidity end up having to essentially compensate market makers for doing so. This is actually not a problem. This is not germane, especially to crypto. In fact, the fragmentation of equity markets in the late 90s has created something called the small cap liquidity crisis, which is basically the same thing that is in crypto right now, where the large market makers are incentivized to go on the large exchanges, and very few people are naturally incentivized to make markets for very small markets. And so what's happening right now in crypto is that basically these large market makers are able to charge a lot of money for their services because they both have the capital as well as the technology to make markets. And so both exchanges as well as token issuers are engaging into these contracts with market makers where they're paying them a monthly fee in exchange for the market maker doing all these things. And from any of you who've negotiated a complicated legal contract, those are pretty expensive. It takes a lot of hassle, there's a lot of coordination costs, but also the problem is there's also a lot of someone has to verify that the market maker is doing their job, right? And so how do you verify? Well, usually these contracts, they stipulate the market maker has to put a certain amount of volume on the order book at a certain spread for a certain amount of time, which means that you basically need a real-time view into the order book to actually verify whether the market maker did their job or not, right? And that's, for folks who are not kind of data engineers or data scientists by training, it's a lot of work to actually verify that. So that's why we feel like a marketplace is a better model for this, because if you have a single basically place where people can transact, it just reduces costs and makes things more efficient. But there's another reason why we think this is a good idea. And it really comes down to something called adverse selection, which is a problem right now with the current model. And what that basically means is, as a market maker, it's your choice whether to make markets or not. And so if the monthly contract calls for you to maintain 90% uptime, Well, naturally, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make markets for the 90% of the month where markets are normal, and when they get really volatile, like a few days ago, I'll just pull my orders off. So what ends up happening is the market makers can effectively game the system by only market making when it's in their interest, but they can still comply with the terms of the contract. But if you're paying for liquidity, like you actually want liquidity, especially in those periods of market stress. But currently, the current bilateral contract model doesn't allow for that. So our solution is to take the monthly fee that people pay market makers and split that into very small, finite blocks. So you can think of these almost like block rewards. So for example, $5,000 a month equals about 10 cents every minute for the whole month. And so basically what we do is we take snapshots of the order book every minute, and whoever's in the book at that time, you guys, the most market makers are earning the block reward. So if it's a very high liquidity scenario, and let's say there's 5 other market makers in the book along with me, then we're each sharing that block reward. But let's say it's a low liquidity scenario, and I'm the only one making markets, well then I get all of it. So essentially the rate of return you earn as a market maker is commensurate with the amount of risk that you bear. In addition, there's kind of like this nice surge pricing effect where when the liquidity is most needed, then you're earning more money from providing it. And then finally, it's not just one market maker. Anyone can now do it. Anyone can pick up download our tool, make markets and start earning these rewards on top of market making. And the reason I wanted to talk about this tonight is because I think this pairs really well with the new tokenomic model that 0x has in V3. In V3, market makers are paid for filling on-chain transactions, right? It's basically a fee for filling transactions. For Hummingbot, you get paid as well. You get paid as well for maintaining open orders on an order book. And so you have essentially you get paid for basically maintaining open orders off-chain, and you get paid on-chain if you fill orders. So I think these two incentivization schemes are actually quite complementary. So let me show you how this works. We did a bit of simulation to try to figure out what this actually looks like. So oh, by the way, I forgot one thing. It's basically, finally, also, I should say, the way that we distribute the rewards on every snapshot is according to spread. So spread is a function, it's basically a proxy for how much risk the market maker takes. And so we use an exponential decay function to weight the orders in an order book by spread, and then the higher spread orders get paid more. And that's basically the curve. Simulation results. So we basically simulated 3 scenarios, and these are meant to correlate to different liquidity regimes. So one where there's 40 market makers, one where there's 60, and one where there's 80. And then we basically simulated sort of what would happen for about a year. So what's interesting is there's really 2 effects here I wanted to notice. The first is that the folks who are putting tighter spreads make more money, right? The tighter the spread you set, the more money you make. Second is the more market makers there are, the less people make. But the biggest takeaway from here is look at that y-axis. Those are annual rates of return. That means basically, let's say if you take that red line, and I'm in the average somewhere, I set my spread in the middle, you can generate a 25% annual return from running a market making bot. And the reason that's the case is because the current market makers today are making a lot more than that, right? Because it's a scarce commodity. And so we believe that by making this available to everyone, we can allow people to actually make much more productive use of their excess inventory than almost doing anything else. We think the returns will literally be, north of 20 or 30% on an annual basis. We can also look at the effect on the market itself, because by having these orders on the book, you're essentially reducing the slippage, the amount that a price changes for an incoming trade, by. So we also simulated trades incoming in the simulation. And so you can see that, essentially the larger orders incur more slippage, obviously. The more market makers there are, the lower it drives slippage. But the bigger takeaway is, I think we kind of realize that the market for liquidity right now, because it's inefficient, liquidity is very expensive. And by making it available to everyone, it basically kind of like, it should lower the equilibrium market rate for liquidity to a level where it's basically good for the folks paying for liquidity, where they're saving money, it's more transparent, it's more verifiable, but it also should be good for the users, because for the folks who are now able to do market making, you can basically make a lot more money than you can otherwise. So that's basically how it works. We are going to roll this out first with 0x. So right now 0x has a market maker program. We're going to start a pilot to do the top of that program to see if this will really work. But we're pretty sure it will. So look out for announcements from us and 0x over the next couple months. And finally, so as with every blockchain project, you have to have a white paper on this. So we just published ours today. Please, if you want it, download it and read it. It should be good, light reading. Okay, thanks.
Hi, I'm Alex Browne, and I'm the technical lead on 0x Mesh. I'm just going to give you a quick update on what we've been working on for the last month and what's coming up in the near future. So 0x Mesh is a peer-to-peer network for sharing orders. There are two main ways to run Mesh. The first way is to run it as a Docker container. Existing relayers and other participants in the 0x ecosystem can use this to share liquidity with one another, and this improves the liquidity pool and ultimately the experience for end users. The other way is that you can run Mesh directly in the browser, and this offers new, exciting opportunities for relayers to allow their users to trade directly with one another without hosting a server or a database on the back end. We've been running a beta test for Mesh over the past 4 months, and I just wanted to share some stats about what's been going on over the past 30 days. We took a snapshot from our monitoring dashboard. We've actually had over 2 million orders go through Mesh during this time period, so we're really excited about having Mesh scale and continuing to drive these numbers up. This month, we've really been focusing on hardening Mesh. We've added a variety of rate limiting techniques and different things to prevent the network from going down in the event of spam. We've also been working on adding more logging and more metrics, including some of the screenshots that I just showed you. We've added V3 support, which is in Mesh today if people want to start testing. And we're going to be releasing a production version, so ending the beta testing period. Hopefully, we're going to do a feature freeze tomorrow. And then after a short period of dogfooding and testing, we'll be announcing the production release. Going forward into next month and for the rest of the year, we're going to be really focusing on propagation speed, so improving how fast orders can travel through the Mesh network. We're going to be improving browser performance and focusing on the browser experience. We're going to be adding support for custom topics. This will allow us to effectively shard the Mesh network, so you'll only be sharing and receiving orders that you actually care about. And we're also exploring new use cases and new message types. For example, we've been investigating the idea of building an RFQ system into Mesh. If you want to learn more about what we're working on, you can check out our GitHub. You can talk to us on Discord. You can look at the docs for Mesh. I'll also be around after this talk if you want to come and ask questions.